Come on along and listen to the lullaby of Broadway, the hipporay and ballyhoo, the lullaby of Broadway, the rumble of the subway train, the rattle of the taxi, the daffodils who entertain, the Angelos and Maxie's when Broadway baby says goodnight. It's early in the morning.
Hello, and welcome to the American Theatre Wing seminars on working the theatre. They're coming to you from the Graduate Center of the University of New York on 42nd Street in the heart of Times Square between Fifth Avenue and Avenue of the Americas. I'd like to go back for just a few words to tell you a little bit about the American Theatre Wing and why these seminars. The Wing was started as a wartime organization. It is perhaps the longest running organization in the country. The concept was to help the community through the theater. There were returning veterans who wanted to know how to retool their trade, how to become an actor, a writer, a director again. And so a school was formed, and in that school the experienced passed along their talents and their knowledge to those that wanted to learn. Kermit Bloomgarden and Richard Rogers and Harold Prince all gave of their talents, and a student could come in or out of any one of the rooms and take a little bit or a lot. We felt that there was a lack in that particular kind of experience sharing, and so we created the seminars. We are now in our third year here at City University, and I am very pleased and very proud to have them. There is another part of the wing that continues as well as a service organization, and that is our sending of shows, professional Broadway shows and off-Broadway shows, into hospitals and prisons. We also do a Saturday Theater for Children program, which goes into the public schools, the elementary public schools, so we capture the love, and the interest, and the awareness of theater at the earliest age. This, we think, will be casting our bread upon the waters as well as doing a marvelous service to young people. Our other program, you probably know, is the most glamorous, and that's the Tony Awards, which were created, again, by the American Theatre Wing. And contrary to the general thought, it is not for the best of anything, but it is to reward the achievement of excellence in their craft. And so on our panel on playwriting this morning, I think we have a group that have achieved that excellence as well in their craft. I have on my left Henry Hughes and Jean Dalrymple, both members of the board, who will act as moderators of this exciting, wonderful, and knowledgeable panel. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope you will enjoy it. Oh, I'm Isabel Stevenson, and I'm president of the American Theatre Wing.
I'd like to introduce the panel. On my right, the mustache, is Jack Heifner, who wrote the most widely performed American play to be written in the last 5 years, I guess, Vanities, and has since that time written Patio Porch, and has also written a new play which is going to be done in January, which at the moment is called Star Treatment, but he's not quite sure of the title. On my right is Robert Anderson, who ironically or paradoxically or coincidentally started the playwriting program at the American Theatre Wing School before Isabel and I guess, Jean, were you in the picture then?
Yes.
Yeah. And he created the Robert Anderson Chair of Playwriting. One of Bob's great distinctions, and I think we can go into this this morning, is that he was the first new playwright to be taken into the Playwrights company, which was that very distinguished company of Maxwell Anderson, Sidney Howard, and and S.N. Behrman. And when he wrote Tea and Sympathy, everybody was so pleased that they invited him to join that company, which was a great honor. Since that time, he's had great success. You Know I Can't Hear You When the Water's Running is the most recent Broadway success he has, but he's just finished a new play, and he hasn't titled it yet, but he hopes it'll be done either in the spring or next fall. On my left is Jean Dalrymple, who has written 3 plays, the most successful of which was called The Quiet Room, which has not only been performed in this country, but it's been translated into German and performed in Austria. She doesn't allow her plays to be done in New York.
That's the trick thing.
Casting pearls before swine, that good. And on her left is Henry Denker, who is the fashion plate among playwrights. He constantly is wearing a different vest, and today he's treated us to a red one. His most famous play, I guess, is Far Country, that play about Freud, and which Kim Stanley played so marvelously. He has a new play called Horowitz and Mrs. Washington, which is scheduled to be done in January. And on his left is Arnaud, who many of you will remember for his For Deep Are the Roots and Tomorrow the World, which were 2 socially significant plays of the 40s. And then Ladies of the Corridor, which he did with Dorothy Parker in the 50s. And he now has a new play called Bledsoe, which may be done this year or next. I think what we might get at today, of interest to everybody, is I think we all feel that playwrights become successful, and then from then on it's a breeze after their success everybody just comes and asks them for their next play, and it's all easy going. But I think that maybe that some of our panelists might have something to say about that. We've just been joined by Rose Leiman Goldemberg, who is the author of Letters from Home, which has just been done at the American Place. It's based on the letters of the late Sylvia Plath. So maybe we can get into this. Jack, I suppose that for you, the success, you're not quite as blasé as the other people here are about success, because your big success was only, what, 2 or 3 years old. Still, you have had the problem of trying to repeat success, and maybe you can talk about that and whether or not this is it was harder to get Vanities produced than it is now to get your subsequent plays produced, and how you go about it.
Well, Vanities was actually very easy to get produced because no one knew me, and I just sort of begged and said, can I have a space to do the play? And Bob Moss, that runs Playwrights Horizons here in New York, let me have a room. 3 friends did it, and there was no intentions of doing anything but trying out the play for ourselves. Since then, of course, new scripts, I don't think it's easier to get them done, because producers say, well, it's not Vanities, and I say, no, because I did that, and I'd like to do something else. And also, if I thought it was the best thing I was ever going to write, why do anything else? And I thought it was a nice beginning, and it certainly has been a blessing, because it was only my 2nd play to have to stop having to do part-time jobs and let the theater be your living, which is what I wanted. And to be able to say I'm a writer is very nice. I don't think it certainly opened doors in terms of being able to get in to see people, but I think everything I've written since are probably better pieces of writing, I feel, or more complex pieces of writing. And Vanities was an exercise to me. I think I take every play like an exercise of what I'm going to try to accomplish next. It was a play about trying to write very sparely and minimal dialogue and 90% subtext, and a very simple play, I think. And since then I've done plays which I think the writing is much more complex, like arias and really word plays. And I don't know, Vanities was, we did it off Broadway, and that's really where I come out of. That's my home, and that's where I've spent most of my time in New York. And
perhaps you could be a bit more specific about the how you went about getting your first play produced, the one before Vanities,
right.
and then just quickly the procedure that Vanities, the route that Vanities followed to success.
Okay, well, the first play I wrote was a play called Casserole, which I think is a funnier play than Vanities. It was a play about eating at funerals, actually, about about the American way of dealing with death. Not a terribly original subject, but really it was a play I felt I had to write. It was that complex first play where you try to put everything you ever knew in your life into one play, and just a total mess, a real casserole. You just everything thrown together, and the big shock out of it, it was done at Playwrights Horizons also, was that the only thing I really got from it particularly was that people laughed at what I had to say, which was the first step. That what I thought was funny, other people thought was funny, really shocked me. So a month later I wrote Vanities, and that was 1975, and I gave it to Bob Moss, and he said, "This play's not about anything." And I said, "Well, I don't do plots yet. Maybe I'll get to them." And I said, "It's also a play about people that don't do anything." And he said, "Well, we can't do this." And so we shelved it, and then in December I begged and pleaded for a space to do it. And so it opened in January of '76. And we moved to Long Island to a regional theater, and then back to the Chelsea West Side Theater here in New York. And it was not a successful play when it opened, particularly. We had the benefit of a subscription, and then went through several bad months. But suddenly, after 3 months after we opened, we sold out, and then it began to take off when Gordon Davidson picked it up to do it at the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles, and then one company began to happen after another, and I felt like the second and third companies were the best companies as far as my work, where I could do a lot of changes, and I didn't stop working on the play till about the fifth company, and the sixth company was one too many, and I said, "I'm destroying the play now instead of helping it."
Do you think perhaps that what gave this play its universality was the fact that it's about people who don't do anything?
I've had to go back and judge it because I've never thought it's a play about women. I think it's a play about friendship, and it's a sort of rites of passage play. I think what the play had and still has, and what we have to keep in the New York production after 4 years, I'll keep going back in and say what it's lost is its innocence, because what made the play happen in the first place was my total innocence about, you don't sit down to write a hit play, I don't think. You write the play you want to write, and it was an innocent statement about my rites of passage and growing up, and where the play ends is where I ended, saying, what do I want to be the rest of my life? And the play said, maybe you're a playwright. It was quite a lucky experience.
Final question is, how did you get to meet Bob Moss, or how did you submit your play to Bob Moss?
Just like every other playwright, I guess, just being real pushy and sending a play to everybody.
You read that Playwrights Horizons existed, and then you went and
Absolutely. Well, I had been an actor and done everything else in the theater, stage managed, all those jobs, but really a matter of just sending out as many scripts as possible, and among all your rejection slips, finding one that said, let's talk about it.
How many did you send out?
On that first play, I must have sent out, I imagine 50.
Bob, can you remember that, back to when you were not yet
Henry,
one of America's great playwrights?
You went to college with me, and this is about, do I remember back? He once introduced me as the George Washington of sex, which is the worst introduction I've ever had in my life because of Waters Running. I think you're going to hear a lot of war stories here today, I imagine. And the comforting thing to any of you who are playwrights is that most of us have had our successful plays turned down by everybody. And I certainly remember Tea and Sympathy. It was turned down by everybody. And my agent, Audrey Wood, who's been my agent and a marvelous agent for 34 years, that's a long run, took me out to lunch and said, you know, nobody wants to do the play, and there's one copy out, and when that comes back, I'll send it back to you and get on to your next play. And that didn't come back, and it was from the Playwrights Company. The same thing had happened with all my three successes. You know, I Can't Hear When the Water's Running was turned down by everybody. Nobody wanted to do one-act plays. Nobody wanted to do 4 dirty plays. I just came...
They weren't all dirty, were they?
Well, they weren't dirty at all. Neither was Tea and Sympathy. Except a lot of people wouldn't do it because it was they said it'd be a succès de scandale. Can you imagine Tea and Sympathy, a scandalous play? But it was, and so was Water's Running. And nobody wanted to do I Never Thanked My Father either. Nobody wanted to be shattered in the theater. I was going through my files the other day looking for something, and I came across letters from producers. And mind you, these two plays were being sent around at the same time. You know, I Can't Hear When the Water's Running, I Never Thanked My Father. And letter after letter came back saying, not interested at all. And Water's Running was on its way back into my files when Audrey said, do you mind if I send it to 2 people who have never done a play before? And I said, what have we got to lose? And this turned out to be Jack Farron and Gilbert Cates. And then after that, Gil Cates did I Never Thanked My Father. If I have a minute, I'll tell you, I think a story that would be comforting to all of you and more or less wraps up what the theater and the movie is all about is the story of I Never Thanked My Father. I got tired of writing for the theater. I was rather disillusioned about it, and I decided I'd write some original movies. So I wrote a movie about my father, and I called it The Tiger. And I just finished it when I was on the coast, and I'd written a movie called The Nun's Story, which Audrey Hepburn was in, and Fred Zinnemann had directed. And Fred had dinner with my wife and myself, and he said, a big project of mine has just fallen through. Do you have anything we could do together? Because we'd worked very happily on The Nun's Story. So I tore the last page out of the typewriter and put it in some sort of an envelope and gave it to him. And he went off to London the next day. And he called me from the London airport, and he said, I've just read The Tiger, and it's your best piece of work, and it's going to be my next movie, and we're going to get Spencer Tracy to do it. So I said, well, that's great. And I was very happy. It turned out that Spencer Tracy did not want to play an old man. So I sent all my work to Elie Kazan. He's just gotten my new play. He's reading it this moment, I hope, because he directed Tea and Sympathy. And he called me, and he said, I've just read it, and I love it. Will you turn it into a play for Lincoln Center? They were just getting going in those days. That's how old we are. And so I said, I'd be, you know, thrilled. However, he said, don't do it because we don't know whether we're going to have a cast or anybody to play this old man. So I waited about 5 or 6 months, and he and Bob Whitehead called me and said, we have nobody to play the old man, and so forget it. We're sorry. Meanwhile, John Frankenheimer, a very distinguished movie director, had read it, and he was making a picture called 7 Days in May with Freddie March. And he called me from the desert, where he was shooting some of the scenes, and he said, I can't sign contracts with you now because I'm in the desert. You can hear the sand blowing against the telephone booth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he said, Freddie is going to play the old man, and I was very excited and thought that was marvelous. So he says, my play, isn't it? And I said, for a movie. He says, my movie, isn't it? And I said, yes, it's your movie. And so I forgot about it. And then about 8 months later, playwrights have to be very patient. I got a letter from his secretary saying that he'd taken off for Europe and he'd be in touch with me on his return. At which point I called him, or I wrote him a letter, and I said, what gives, John? And he wrote back and he said, I've got so many big projects to take, I have to drop this one. I'm terribly sorry. At which point I turned it into a play myself called I Never Thanked My Father. And as I just said, nobody wanted to do it. And it was on its way back, except that after Water's Running was a success, Gil Cates finally said, well, I love the play. It's going to be a very difficult play to do, but I would like to do it. At which point I got a telephone call from a man named Martin Manulis, who used to produce Playhouse 90, a very distinguished television show. And he said, CBS has just asked me to do a 2-hour special, and I want to do The Tiger. And I said, The Tiger is no longer The Tiger. It's a play called I Never Thanked My Father, and we're about to go into rehearsal. And he said, but I have the cast. and they've all read it, and they've all going to approve to do it. Would you like to hear it? And I said, yes. Spencer Tracy will play the father. Katharine Hepburn will play the mother. Richard Widmark will play the son. And he said, I assume that Teresa Wright, who was my wife, would like to play the daughter. And I batted my eyes and went to my producer, and I said, what do we do? And he says, well, it's going to be a very difficult, tough show to put on. Why don't you let them do it? So I called Martin, and I said, it's okay, it's your show. And he called me back in 2 weeks, and he said, CBS has read it and finds it's too shattering, and they don't want to do it. And that's how we finally got a play on Broadway with Alan Webb, Lillian Gish, Teresa, and Hal Holbrook, and a movie with Mel Douglas and Gene Hackman and various Academy Award nominations and so on. So, as Henry has indicated, the first success means nothing. The only thing a first success means is that they will read your play more rapidly. Or, for example, the word gets around that I've written now my first play in 8 years, and everybody's saying, oh, can I read it, can I read it? Which means nothing either. David Merrick called me once on Christmas Eve, and he said, Bob, this is David Merrick. And I said, sure. You know, anyway, he finally convinced me it was David Merrick, and he says, I'll produce your next play. And I said, David, this happened to be Water's Running. And I said, you wouldn't be interested in this kind of play. I would anyway. I sent it to him, never heard from him even. So that all it does is that they want to read it because you've had past successes, but it doesn't mean that you're a leg up at all. One of the things that Henry mentioned, the Playwrights Company, now there was 5 or whatever number it was at the time I came in, Robert Sherwood, Maxwell Anderson, Elmer Rice, and even though they're their own production company, they couldn't get their last plays produced. It's unthinkable that a Bill Styron or Phil Roth or anybody like that would not get a novel published. I don't care if it be a success or not, that's something else again. But there are many very successful playwrights who can't get their plays even produced. That's enough.
Gene, do you want to tell us why you don't allow your plays to be done in New York?
I've had very bad luck. Gilbert Miller was going to do The Quiet Room in New York, and he died. Margot Jones was going to do The Feathered Fauna in New York, and she died. So, also, I always felt that playwriting was a very lonely job, and I like to work with people, so I really turned to producing. And I got so busy producing, particularly at City Center, that I never seemed to have time to push my own shows or even to write another one.
I started and you couldn't convince yourself as a producer to produce this play you'd written?
I didn't have time.
Oh.
I was too busy doing other people's plays. That's really the truth.
And you didn't have an agent?
No, I never had an agent.
Okay. Henry, do you want to talk a little bit about what it's like to, I guess you're the consummate professional among writers in the sense that we all think of you as being able to work in all media, and that you and you tend to be able to you tend to stress some of the old-fashioned things like plot, and that some of the newer playwrights have a contempt for. Do you want to talk about that?
I was all set to talk about what these fellows.
Oh, I will talk about that.
Because this is a perfect illustration of what you're getting at. My first play was Time Limit, and it was sold within 24 hours. 2 producers wanted it in 24 hours. One of them was the Theater Guild. So I figured, man, this is the way to go. You know, you just write them and boom, they're sold the next day. That's the last time that ever happened to me. It gets tougher for certain reasons which are, I think, purely artificial. For example, there is a prejudice in the theater against the established playwright. I never heard of anybody setting up a foundation to aid the production of established playwrights. But you can take almost anything and get some foundation to give it a grant and have it produced. And the whole emphasis is on this so-called new talent. Now, I grant you there's new talent around, but not the new talent I've seen around. I mean, you cannot take a mediocre production from Chicago and bring it to New York and acclaim it because it's a new playwright, and then blame that playwright the next 5 times out because he's not as good as you thought he was, you know. So I think if everybody stopped this pressure for new playwrights and just, you know, sort of took everybody on their own terms, you'd have more established playwrights being produced. The thing you said about being a professional writer is there another reflection on playwriting in this country. In the last 12 years, I've written 14 novels and only 3 plays. And there's a reason for that. And Bob was getting at it. You can have a novel published, whereas a play can go begging for many reasons. I have a play that's been optioned by every producer who ever read it. That's never been produced.
It was only for optioning.
No. There's one big problem with it. It takes a peculiar piece of casting. Not peculiar in the sense that it's, an odd freak casting. No, it takes a tremendous actor, of which we don't have a single one in this country. I think more plays fail to be produced because of casting than for any other reason. There are many, many plays that are in producers' offices, and they say, if I could just find the right man to play this, I'll put it on, and they mean it.
But not only does he have to be the right man in terms of being able to act the role, he has to be the right man in being a star that will attract people in the box office. So that I think that's the...
And we don't have any stars for all practical purposes. We have no stars. We have wiped out a whole generation of stars through this peculiar mechanism called the actor studio and this whole concept of method acting.
Bombs.
But don't you think the producers are a little bit timid about accepting a man who can give a superb performance in a role who is not a star?
Well, Henry, there's a sort of a basic flaw in that kind of thinking, and that is if a man has got that kind of talent and he reaches the age of 40, he is a star.
That's right.
In other words, he's already proved that he's a star by that time, if he's got the talent you're talking about.
That's absolutely true. It's almost impossible to find someone between 40 and 50 to play a part, because by that time he'd be a star if he had the great talent.
Yeah, and now we have another hindrance that's in the way, and that's the thing called television. Television snaps up everybody, and they have the money to put them under option. I can't tell you how many so-called stars, I call them names, but so-called stars, who today cannot appear in a play because CBS has them on a 6-month option, so they can't make any commitment till, next April. Well, if you want your play on now, you can't wait for him. And an endless number of pretty good actors and pretty good names who are tied up to television deals of one kind or another. So that a lot of that talent, whatever it was, and I never thought it was too much, has been siphoned off.
Arnaud, you've had this problem with Bledsoe, haven't you?
It's such a series of misfortunes. I think would depress everybody talking about it.
Well...
Oh, Henry, may I just have a postscript mentioning death? I want to tell you what happened to a very good play of mine. I think one of the best plays I ever wrote. Roger Stevens wanted to do that play, and he wanted to do it here, and then he decided, no, it's the kind of play that demands English acting, that got that scope. So he went over to London, and he saw Binky Beaumont, and Binky read the play, and he loved it, and they were going to do it, and they had dinner on a Wednesday night, and they had set all the terms of the deal, how it was going to work. They'd do it over there, and then they'd bring it over here and do it at the Kennedy Center, and so on and so forth. And Mr. Beaumont went to sleep Wednesday night and never woke up Thursday morning.
It's like Gene, you're old young.
Think of that when you're writing your play.
Yeah. Well, my plays were, Margot produced mine down in Dallas, and then it played all over the summer circuit and all the regional theaters, but she wanted to bring it to New York, and she was the only one, and I didn't have time to think about it myself. My other play, The Quiet Room, was a question of casting. Gilbert Miller was looking for the ideal comedian who should have been a Josephine Hull type, and Josephine died while he was considering it. And then he waited and waited, and of course there's been nobody like Josephine Hull who's come along since
Arnold's
then.
story is the worst of all in all terms.
No, I'm not going to go into
You're not going to tell us about Bledsoe?
I think you have to. No, you want to be fair with these people, you have to tell them what really goes on.
I think it's encouraging for them to hear.
How long ago did you finish Bledsoe?
I was that high. A long time ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago. And Kermit read it. Kermit had done 2 of my plays.
Kermit Bloomgarden.
Kermit Bloomgarden, yes. And he wanted to do it. And George Scott agreed to do it. And I was in France at the time. I came twice from France to see Scott. Went down in Bermuda, and we talked. And he said, yes, we'll do it. And then he and Scott and Scott's agent got into lengthy disputes. Finally, the terms that they offered Kermit were so humiliating, he didn't feel he could take them. I agreed with him. Also, one of the conditions was that I leave my agent and go with Scott's agent. And for me, of course, this was unthinkable. And so we just dropped it. But 8 months, Anyway, finally, I think the next year we had Richard Boone, and he agreed to do it. Ed Sheeran was to play in it, Jane Alexander. We were all cast. Sets were being built, and Boone got ill with emphysema. And this was a very big blow because Kermit had spent $40,000 of his own money, which is an awful lot of money for a producer to put into a project, but he had the contracts. As a matter of fact, he took Boone to arbitration because he said, look, you knew you had emphysema before, why did you sign the contract? Well, he won the arbitration, but on the other hand, there was no play. Boone just didn't feel he could do it, and perhaps he was right. And then, of course, what happened is that Kermit himself got sick and died, and so we had to start all over again. And now we've had a series of experiences. I met with Robert Shaw. Shaw loved the play. We had long talks at Hotel Carlisle, very eager to do it. 51, Robert Shaw died. And it's been like that. Anyway, we've had to start over a number of times, and we're still trying to get it on. The only thing I would say about, to augment what Bob and the others have said, is you just got to develop a skin and not really pay any attention. You do your work. I mean, 25 producers turned down Tomorrow of the World, but there was a 26th one who took it. And then we thought that, I did that play with James Gow, and we thought afterwards that the second one would be easy. It isn't. It gets harder for some reason, for the reasons that Bob and the others have mentioned. In the case of Deeper the Roots, 6 producers turned it down. And it was then that I said to Jimmy, I said, we've got to get our own producer. And we did. And that's when Kermit Bloomgarden started producing. He had been a general manager for Herman Shumlin. He had done one play years before, but he was then a general manager. And there was George Heller, who was the executive secretary of AFRA, and they produced the play. The only play that I got on without any difficulty, which is a play I did with Jimmy Gow called Legend of Sarah, and it had the shortest run. So I begin to think that perhaps if you have difficulties, that's good luck. Anyway, as I say, you just can't pay any attention to that. All of the handicaps are there that Mr. Denker has mentioned. Good acting seems to be diminishing. Costs are going up. But I feel that somehow, if you write a good play, it may be put on a houseboat in the East River, people will come to see it. You've just got to have a perhaps blind faith. Anyway, I do, and I go on writing them.
I'd like to ask both you and Mr. Denker if you have considered having your play done in a resident theater where you don't have the same roadblocks to production, and where you can try an actor you're not quite sure of to see how it works. I know Bob has had, you've had plays done in Dallas and
Long Wharf. Long Wharf.
And Long Wharf, and I know that you've had play done. You had The Headhunter was done at Texas Christian.
I've done a few plays in Bucks County too.
Yeah. But if hit a roadblock, why not go to the resident theater with the play?
May I just add something on to Arnaud's story? The producer of my new play had a play and ran into the same problem with George Scott. He gave in, he accepted the humiliating terms. George Scott bought the play, paid for it with his own money, and then suddenly one day called up and said, I don't want to do it. So even if you'd given in to all those terms, he probably wouldn't have done it anyhow.
Arnaud, have you considered making Bledsoe available to some of the good resident theaters?
That's been suggested on the basis that if you start that way, you can save about $100,000. But nothing has come of it, really. The problem we have in that play is the one that Mr. Denker mentioned. That is the problem of casting of the main character. It's difficult to cast. It really requires a star, not only because it's cost $450,000 to do a one-set play, but the actor is on the stage all but about 10 minutes. It needs a larger-than-life actor. It needs a Scott. It needs a Tony Gwynn. It needs a Robert Shaw. It needs that particular type of actor.
I know that, for instance, Paul Baker down at Dallas got Zero Mostel to go down there and appear in The Latent Heterosexual, so that sometimes a good resident theater can get a excellent actor.
Yeah, a star.
I think Roses get right into what you're talking.
No, we'll get to her now.
Right now.
Yeah. I'd like to just finish with this. Yeah. So that it's possible that you might get a really prominent actor and very talented actor to go out to the resident theater for that one play.
But Hefner, you know, there are an awful lot of problems with this, and maybe we'll get back to it after Rose, but having had a play done in various regional theaters, Playwright is very leery about the first time he has his play done. I mean, this is a virgin play, it's a first exposure, and he always wants it done the best it possibly can be done. And if it gets a bad exposure or something goes wrong, in New York we have all sorts of controls. We have extraordinary controls, as you all know, I hope. The playwright has absolute veto power over director, scene designer, actors, everything. And sometimes if he gets slotted into a regional theater and they've got him slotted, and suddenly he can't cast the play, it's too late. He can't pull out, and he goes maybe with an inadequate actor, or if he doesn't like the set or doesn't like something, he can't change it. I've had this experience. He's got to go with that because he's committed to it. Whereas here, we don't commit to a theater, we don't commit to anything until the playwright presumably has as close to what he wants as possible.
But if it turns out badly, does that ruin the play for the...
Yes.
Nobody will take it?
It was done in Oshkosh. I heard it was a lousy play in Oshkosh. Let's not bother with it.
Yep.
Believe me, the mystique of this thing, and what Arnaud was saying is true. I have this new play of mine. I love the Long Wall Theater. Maybe we'll do it there, but I need 4 great actors. I had an experience with my last play, Solitaire, Double Solitaire, where we intended to simply, I wanted Arvin Brown to direct it, and Arvin said, I can only direct it if you let me put it in as one of my series. But the idea was that we'd have a whole new cast. We had Larry Blyden standing by. We had a bunch of, stars or names or whatever you want to call them. And we opened in Long Wharf, and we got such extraordinary reviews as saying, my best play. We were invited to the Edinburgh Festival on the basis of it. We didn't dare change the cast. We didn't dare change a thing because all the New York critics had come up and already given their reviews. Made me proud to be part of the American theater and so on. And we came in, and I'm not saying that the cast wasn't good. It was very good.
But you might have liked to make an improvement in one role or something.
Well, it was an excellent cast, an excellent ensemble. But as we saw with Devour the Snow, look at those extraordinary reviews that got. And it closed in 1 week. Now, had there been a name in it, had there been a star in it, it would have helped enormously.
What you do is you write for actors. I mean, at least I do. I wrote for Walter Houston for years. I never got him. But he was such a marvelous actor. He was such a marvelous actor that every time I thought of it, and that's the trouble a little bit with resident theater. You don't, you feel you're not going to get the best actors. And that's really what you want. And when you do get them, it's a pleasure. You write, and what happens is that you very often get an actor who does just about what you thought the part would do. Then you get some that do less. But every once in a while you get something that really makes your lines sing, and it's a marvelous, marvelous experience. It's happened to me a number of times, and this is what you hope for. I did a play with Dorothy Parker called Ladies with Carter. Everybody was surprised how good Edna Best was. Well, I knew she was good because I'd seen her in a lot of things which I liked. But she was really one of the best parts she ever does, and she played it beautifully. And this is, of course, what you look for. This is what you, in a sense, look for more than anything else when you write a play. You want, of course, the audience to like it. You want to make money, but really what you want to see is the actors do to your lines what you hope for. And that's why resident theater is discouraging to me.
I know for a long time I had the notion that, as a critic, that the most plays were not, as they appeared on Broadway opening night, were not exactly what the author had in mind, because he didn't know that this actor would play that role, or the director would stress this, or whatever it was. And I was talking to Maxwell Anderson about it, and he said, every single one of my plays, I feel the actors have enriched it more than I thought that they would. And I thought this was very surprising. I expected him to say, the actors have ruined my plays, but they haven't. Would you all more or less agree that actors...
I've been asked that question many times, and I give a very terrible answer.
Yeah.
My terrible answer is I always dreamed that they would be played magnificently when I wrote it, and so I've had no surprises. I've had marvelous performances.
The last good performance of a play is when the author reads it over himself and sends it to the typist. Yeah. It's the last time you get a good reading of a play.
Rose, you're an example of a playwright who is new to us, at least, and you have had your first play done, or you have had the first play that I know about of yours done at the American Place Theater, which is a kind of resident theater in New York City. It is a theater that's devoted to doing worthwhile plays that are not necessarily hot box office, but which they consider high-quality plays. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience and how you managed to get this first play on and what happened with it?
I could talk forever. It's interesting.
That's why we left you for last.
Yes. It's interesting because this is my 9th play. It's by no means the first one that I've had on. You have to forgive me. I have already gotten up, taken 2 Valiums and 2 aspirins. I have a very bad backache, and I think it's because I got kicked in the behind so badly with Letters Home. Letters Home is a play which was a tremendous hit at the American Place, but got very bad reviews. And so it's my first experience with that. I've been overpraised all my life, and I prefer it. But Letters Home played to standing ovations, to audiences that said, this is the most exciting thing we've ever seen. I've got to run right out and tell everybody to come see it. It got a very poor Times review, got a very poor Post review, and got a mixed news review. Got some raves which didn't matter. And it was my first experience with how those reviews step on the lifeline of the play. And it was, sorry, it's something I'd love to share with you if I could talk. It's something that I think teaches me what a playwright has to be, besides immensely energetic, besides a very good business person, which I had not known when I started writing, besides being absolutely thick-skinned like an elephant, absolutely optimistic to the point of madness. You also have to realize that what you're doing is for the audience, not for the reviewers, not even for yourself, not for the actors. That if somehow you get from you to the audience, you've made an immense jump. And the reviewers can stop that jump. They can step on the lifeline and simply cut you off from your audience, which is what happened in a way to Letters Home. I came to the American Place by accident because they had a women's project, and I had always said firmly, I am not a woman playwright. I am a playwright. I happen to be a woman. I happen to be 5'3", happen to have brown eyes, you know. They had a women's project. There was funding and interest in a women's play, and this was a play about the relationship of 2 women, a mother and a daughter. I came to writing the play because I read the book, Letters Home, and it seemed to me that a great injustice had been done to a mother. I was tired of dumping on mothers. I am both a mother and a daughter, and I just had begun to feel in my life that mothers were being blamed for every damn thing, and they had hardly done any of it. And I read about Aurelia Plath, who loved her daughter and had been as supportive as any mother could possibly be, and had ended up being blamed for her suicide. And it seemed so unfair, and it seemed as though, in that first heat of wanting to write a play, it seemed as though I could turn that all around. So I wanted to adapt that book for theater, not for television at all, but for theater. And I spoke to Julia Miles about it, and she was in the first heat of getting a wonderful grant to do women plays, women playwrights, and said, it sounds like an exciting idea. What do you need? And I said, I just need space. I want to work with actors. It's the same kind of thing that you talked about. And so I started working with the actors on what seemed to be a new form to me, using the real words of real people, because I didn't want to be accused again of writing a fiction, using real language, the real things that these real women said to each other, which revealed to me the real things they meant. And those 2 things were not the same. What they meant and what they said were different. And so what I wanted to do was somehow carve out of all of those words which would reveal what they really meant. And we did a workshop of the play in, the beginning of June, I guess. The audience was enthusiastic and the reviews were gorgeous. And on the basis of that, the American Place opened their season with the play. And the play looked much better. It had been refined. It had been cut a little bit. We had had time to re-rehearse with our director and to find those places in which the play was not absolutely clear. We opened with really a gorgeous production that sent people out cheering and weeping. And Walter Kerr said he neither understood it nor felt anything. The only thing he felt guilty about not feeling anything. And other reviewers were not even that kind. And we played for 4 weeks to audiences that stood up and cheered. What happened in the theater seemed to have no relationship whatsoever to what had happened in the press. And I don't know what to make of that, except to say to playwrights, you have to develop an attitude towards your work which I guess says, I am speaking to an audience through actors, through a director, but it is what the audience feels that must count. And in a way, it's heartening to me to hear that if you have a hit play, it doesn't matter, the second play is just as hard to get on, because somehow I had felt that if Letters Home had gotten those good reviews and had been able to take off and fly, it would have been easier the next time. Maybe
you don't suffer so much from having bad reviews for your first play in terms of getting your second play done.
Well, you know, an interesting thing happened. I learned things that I would have never learned had I gotten good reviews. I got letters from people, some of whom had seen the play and some of whom had not, some of whom knew me and some of whom did not, saying, hey, you have joined a very eminent club. Aida got bad reviews, was one of the telegrams I got. I got letters from people who said, you've written a wonderful and beautiful piece of work. The fact that some people don't understand it doesn't change that. I got a letter from Anna Moore, who had had a very poor experience with her first play, a very painful experience, far more painful than mine. And she wrote and said, you've written a wonderful piece of work. Only a work that is powerful can call forth that kind of anger. And it wasn't the words of those telegrams, it was the fact that there's a kind of support network. If any of you have ever been divorced, you know that friends whom you didn't even know were divorced say to you, hey, listen, I went through this and I know how it feels. If you've ever had a miscarriage, women you never knew had a miscarriage say to you, hey, I know how that feels. When you have a play that gets this kind of response, playwrights whom you would kiss the toe of write you a letter or come and find you and say, hey, I know how this feels. Don't let it stop you from writing. Howard Teichman has a play in the basement now, which got very nice reviews, and is a very nice play about Alexander Woollcott. And one day he came through the theater, and it seemed like he was just kind of wandering through. And he started to talk to me and tell me about his life and his experience. And about 3/4 of the way through it, I said, Howard, did you find me, or were you just wandering through? He said, no, I found you. I wanted to talk to you and tell you how this feels, how good your play is, how good you are, how you mustn't be discouraged. It is almost, not really, but almost worth that kick in the pants to join that club.
I think we might address start to address. We're going to have to break in about 5 minutes, but we can continue after the break. The problem of playwriting itself. I'm sure that you all have little things that work for you as playwrights that you could pass on to people who are having trouble when they put that first sheet of paper in the typewriter and write down Act 1, Scene 1. If you perhaps can get them beyond that to the next or to that next line that should be on page 1.
Well, it all should start before they got the paper in the typewriter. For me, a play is almost entirely written before I start to write the play. I have many mottos that I have hanging over my desk, which at the advanced age that I'm at, I still need. People come into my office every once in a while, that's somebody, and they look at it and they say, my God. One of my most famous ones is nobody asked you to be a playwright, which is extremely important, because whenever I feel self-pity, that helps me a lot. I believe that one of the best phrases I've ever heard about the writing is art gives form to feeling. Art gives form to feeling. It seems to me that that's what I'm talking about, that you write your play before it gets into the typewriter. When I sit down and say now that let's say I've written a television show or a movie or a novel or something, and I say now I want to write a play, it's the skill and the craft have nothing to do with it. What do I feel strongly enough about to want to spend a year, 2 years, whatever number of time length it's going to take for me to write that play? Along with that goes a review that a French critic wrote of an aging, famous French artist by the name of André Derain. And he had an exhibit towards the end of his life, and the review went like this: the skill of his hands could not make up for the emptiness of his heart. Now, this is very important. I don't care how skillful we all become as playwrights, and all of us here know how to write plays and the skill of how to introduce a scene and finish a scene and move on, etc., etc. But the basic thing has to be that feeling. And I am so tired of the contemporary theater, a great deal of the contemporary theater, where I can put it to you 6 different ways. One of the ways is there's motion all over the stage, but no emotion. Or everything was moving all over the stage all night, but in the end, nothing was very moving. The matter with the theater is the manner is the matter. I mean, there has been so little feeling. And this is feeling for humor, feeling for tragedy. Howard Lindsay, who was one of our great gods in the early days for young playwrights, he was a marvelous man encouraging young playwrights, used to say, your play must pay off in one of 3 coinages. It must pay off in humor or emotion or excitement in a major way. He says, if it pays off just a little in all of them, you have a very mild play. And that's one of the things I was talking about, that I Never Thanked My Father was a shattering play. Walter Kerr didn't happen to be shattered by it. He said that it only made him feel guilty for not feeling. I mean, that's we're hearing that all over again. But I believe Walter is a very, very, very fine critic. I admire him enormously. You know, I Came to When the War Was Running was a very funny play. It also had some very serious backbone to it underneath it. So that is the first thing that a player, and if you don't have that strong feeling, don't sit down to write the play, because no amount of paper in the typewriter is going to help you at all. So the first thing is to say, what do I feel strongly about? Either as something terribly funny, or terribly touching, or terribly exciting. That's the first thing. Should we go on to there?
You want to tell them the second thing, and then I'll go get to that?
No, I mean, that...
All right.
Jack?
Well, I think the major thing, the way I work particularly, I mean, right now I'm working in some television shows, and I simply hate it. And it's the thing that keeps me running back to the theater. Theater's home, and when I'm working, I mean, talk about signs. I've been working on a show for 6 months, and finally I had to put up a sign that says, think stupid, in order for me to be able to work on this particular project. So, because I was getting too ambitious about what I wanted to do. So it's a good way to make some money. But writing plays to me is a process. I mean, exactly. Of people say, "Why aren't you working?" I say, "I am working." It's a matter of probably sitting 6 months to a year. It's all formulating in your head, and I have to work just as a process straight through. Absolutely, beginning to end, even if I put something happens here. Because to me, the joy of the writing is really in fiddling with lines and words and emotions and maybe not saying what you intend to say and let the audience figure out that you meant to say something else. And it's been the problem with this new play, which was written with right after Vanities, which we're doing in the spring. It's a play that so relies on, and I think that's what theater is. I think it is 1/4 actors, 1/4 writer, 1/4 director, and the rest is and 1/4 audience. And that old line about it happens somewhere out in the middle, in the air, and it's magic. And if it's not magic, I won't do it anymore.
Right. We're going to have to break for a second, and we'll be right back.
Are you there, Henry?
5 minutes, okay? We're starting up again in 5 minutes.
God, if I joined
Hello, and welcome again to the American Theater Wing series on the theater. This series is coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. It's on 42nd Street, and it's between 5th Avenue and the Avenue of the Americas, right in the heart of Times Square, where the theater is, and the wonderful area that is Broadway and off-Broadway, all coming together. We have a marvelous group of panelists for you here, and they have been discussing the role of the playwright in the theater, the marvelous problems that come out of it, and the wonderful, wonderful words that they are able to give an audience a joy and despair and sorrow and whatever it is. The playwright is truly the heart of the theater. I'm going to introduce once more Henry Hughes and Jean Dalrymple, who are our co-moderators. And the American Theater Wing seminars are being broadcast 3 times a week on Channel B. They are on every Wednesday from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m., every Thursday from 6:30 to 8:30, and every Friday from 10 a.m. to noon. I would like to thank Robert Isaacson, who is a director of Cumbin and has made possible these seminars. This is where we have been housed for the past 3 years. He has a wonderful crew of cameramen and directors and lighting. And also, I would like to thank our program director, Mr. Riley, who has done a wonderful job in assembling this. I am Isabel Stevenson, and I am president of the wing, and I thank you all for coming. And I'm going to turn over the seminars right now to our co-moderators, Jean Dalrymple and Henry Hughes. Thank you.
Thank you. When we left our heroes, Jack Heifner was saying something about the discomfort of working in television and perhaps how that helped or hurt his writing. I know that Jerry Lawrence, who wrote Mame and Inherit the Wind, always used to had his 10 commandments for the playwright, and one of them is, "Thou shalt not commit television." And so perhaps you'll say a little more about that before we go.
Okay. Well, I was involved in adapting Vanities to television, which has never been on, and it was a process of, I'm not so sure anymore that a playwright should try to do an adaptation of his own work. I think a play, you consider it finished, and why go back and start messing with it? I think I want to do television. Peter Stone, a wonderful writer, said to me, he said, "You want to do it because it's there, and you wonder how good things get on and how people how they get on television." Well, my experiences have not been that good with it, even though they haven't been terrible. But it makes me love the theater even more, and maybe it's because of what Bob said about it is the place where I feel the most control. Another thing about writing is I think. I don't particularly know where plays come from. I keep everything. They're shoeboxes full of material that you suddenly... The new play of mine was actually a one-act play that was written to go with Vanities, which now, 4 years later, has been expanded into a full-length play. It's just... also, yes, I'm very dependent upon actors, but Bob and Anderson and I were talking about... the play Porch that I wrote, which is still the best play I've ever written, I consider, failed miserably in New York because it was a play that was, I thought, word perfect and really arias of writing, of a woman sitting in a wheelchair. There was no movement required for the entire play. And it still didn't have, the play is, in my estimation, perfect, but something I couldn't give to it any more than that. The director and the actresses couldn't find out how to do it. So that's a play that I still feel like is a better play than anything I've ever written, but was lost totally in production, a play that I thought should have closed. I mean, it just never was going to work on stage the way I wanted it to.
You think it might work with different actors and different
I've seen
directors?
it work since,
Oh.
in other productions elsewhere, but it was a matter of the opposite thing than what everyone was talking about. A few people were talking about before, of stars. I pretty well had it with stars, and temperaments and pictures in front of the theater and how big the photograph is and bios. I'd like a good working actress.
That's like your experience with Silent Night, Lonely Night, which had 2 stars in it, were wonderful stars,
yeah.
but they changed the play somehow by their chemistry, and it didn't work.
But that was my fault, because I had absolute control over the casting, and I postponed the production of the play for 2 years, waiting for Henry Fonda and Barbara Bel-Geddes, and then in some very odd way, once it got on, it was the wrong chemistry. But these plays do have other lives. The play of mine called Double Solitaire, which I think had the same fate as yours of Porch, then made a wonderful television production on Channel 13, which they are now going to repeat. And I would like to put in one note here, because I may be the only one who makes it. I hear all the criticism about television and all the criticism about movies, and I go along because it must be their experience. But I have never been asked to write down. I've written a lot of television, I've written a lot of movies, and nobody has ever asked me to write anything but the best I know how to write. Now, I think that one of the reasons is, first of all, I pick my material, and secondly, I am very lucky to have worked with people who want to do good work. I've heard this, have no doubt it's true, and Jerry says it's true, and Terrence McNally just got through something. But I have been very lucky, and nobody has ever said cheapen it up or write it for the mob or make it this, that, and the other thing. I've just been very lucky. I just want to I want that footnote.
I want to add to that.
Yeah, and then Henry, you had, and then after that, Rose.
I think it's wrong to inculcate, particularly in new writers or young writers, the concept that television is a third-rate medium, and for the following reason. You get to be a playwright by experience, not by sitting at a typewriter and writing. Unless you see your work performed in some medium, you're not going to learn very much about playwriting. Now, I came out of the broadcasting business. I was in radio for about 20 years before I was ever on Broadway as a playwright. I learned an awful lot. I learned, in fact, most of it by directing, not by writing. Because then you learn what an actor can do, what a line can do, what's going to happen to a line in an actor's mouth, and so on. I think that television is a good medium. I agree with Bob. I've never been asked to write down. I just finished one big television special, and I'm now in the middle of another one. Nobody said to me, give us something like, second-rate television. Nothing like that. They want the best you can do, and I think you want the best you can do. And I think it's wrong to scoff at any form of experience that you can get as a writer, particularly in anything that has to be performed. Because unless it's performed, you're never going to know how good you are.
Well, now, I think that Jack was talking about sitcom as opposed to writing a
yes,
major
but you can do
piece.
good sitcom. There's nothing wrong with that. I think MASH is a very well-written show. That's sitcom. You want to label it with something.
But I did hear a story
But
the
it's
other day, which is a perfect example of it. A playwright, very good playwright, by the name of Theodore Epstein, whom we all know, used to be here. He's going out to write on the coast now. And he comes from South America, and he was asked to write a love story with a Mexican or South American background. And he's very well equipped to write that. And so he wrote it, and his producer read it and absolutely loved it. And then he sent it on to the network, and the network sent it back to the producer, and the producer called Ted, and he said, Ted, they absolutely love it. They just want to make 2 changes, and that is they don't want it to have a South American background, and they don't want it to be a love story. And they say this with a straight face. This is not a joke. They say that is where the idiocy starts. I just recently did an adaptation of a book and for television, and the producer took it in, and he was pleased with it, and the network started to talk about this, that, and the other thing. And it turned out they'd never read the book. They'd never read the book that they bought. They said, well, what's this and what's that? And he said, but it's in the book. So there is stupidity. There is idiocy.
It's in every area.
There's no question about it. And I really can't, and I agree with Henry. I came out of radio. I wrote about, I was trying to be a playwright, but in order to earn a living, I wrote a show called The Theater Guild on the Air and Cavalcade of America and some of the others. And I got enormous experience. Sure. I mean, to bring in a script that Alfred Linfontaine, Helen Hayes, Montgomery Clift, you name it, was going to read that day. I mean, it was terrifying. It was a wonderful experience, though.
Rose, you had something to say about this.
Yeah, I also have written for television, and my experiences have been happy ones. In fact, television supported Letters Home and Away because it made me able to buy the rights to that book. The reason that I wanted to do that was I had this idea of how I wanted to do it that I couldn't even explain to any other human being. There was no way that I could go to a producer and say, I want to do this book, I can't tell you how, but please buy it for me. Television enabled me to do that, but beyond that, I feel too that I'm a journeyman writer. I like to be able to write anything. And television is different, but it isn't inferior. You have this immense audience, and if I'm not doing it, and if you're not doing it, some schnook is going to do it who's really worse than we are. I mean, some good writers have to get in there and try. The idiocy, well, yes, I've experienced that kind of idiocy, but I also remember that when I was a young playwright, they used to tell a joke, and maybe still do, about a producer who reads your play and says, I love it, except one little thing, I think the man should be a woman. So you go home and you rewrite the play, and you come back and he said, I love it, but I think maybe you were right the first time, make it a woman. So you write back, and then he comes back and he says, I love it, but maybe it should be a homosexual. I mean, that idiocy exists everywhere.
But can you, when you're working in television, take a stand the way you can in the theater? Can you say, my name comes off this if you do this?
Yes, you can. And it's not that the Writers Guild, the Television Writers Guild, is as strong or stronger than the Dramatists Guild in certain ways. Not in that way, but no, the
They can rewrite your script. They can rewrite your script.
Yes,
You have no say on casting.
let me qualify that. You can take your name off. You can fight in many ways. I think the 2 things you don't have, you don't own your script, and that's a very important thing. That when you write for television, David Susskind pays you, David Susskind owns it. If he doesn't choose to put it on, you can't take it elsewhere unless you buy it back, which is a very expensive procedure. You can't always do it. You are working for hire when you work in television. That is true. But beyond...
Take that same script to another network.
You can take it to another writer and
another
have them rewrite
network,
it.
and if they like it and they buy it, you simply pay this guy off with their money.
Yeah.
That's all. Very practical, no
Well,
problems.
there is a way of doing it, but you don't own your work in the way that you do in theater. On the other hand, when it is seen by so many, many people. And that, I mean, that's very exciting. Who do you write for? You write for your audience. So when you can have that kind of audience, when you can have that kind of ability to say to somebody, hey, this is beautiful and that's ugly.
But it's a different audience, Rose. People ask me,
But still an
people
audience.
say to me, isn't it exciting that 50 million people saw your show? And I said, yes, they saw it and they forgot it the next morning. Whereas if I have a play on that runs a year or 2 years, or is done in regional theaters for 2 or 3 or 4 years, or if I write a novel that's read and then read again in paperback, it has a life. I've written some, what I consider very good television shows, and they're gone, and they're not part of the body of my work. I never even bother to list them in the body of my work because they don't have the existence. Somehow they don't have the life.
Very few do.
Well,
Very
they
few
just
do.
don't seem...
That's true, but, and I would agree also that the hardest thing for a playwright is to learn how to write a play. When I was starting, I used to feel as though I were trying to learn brain surgery by mail. I mean, I had nothing to work with. I had no stage. I had no actors. I had no nothing. And yet I was trying to learn what was clearly the most difficult and exacting of crafts.
How did you start?
Well, I really started as a poet, and then I started writing for TV Guide and writing the underlines. It said, you know, Kojak kills his mistress. And in order to be able to do that, I had to read the script, and I said, I can do this. This isn't hard. I can do this. So I tried, and I found out I couldn't do it. And couldn't do it at all. And I realized I knew nothing whatever about actors, about directors, about stages, about painting the stage, and I came to the American Theater Wing and submitted a play to them and said, please help me. I have no money. I want to learn how to write plays. And I got a scholarship, and I was allowed to take, it was when you were over in the, I think on 42nd Street, 44th Street, yes. I was allowed to take any courses I wanted, and I took acting and directing, and I took some playwriting, but I felt I didn't need that. I needed the bricks. I didn't need the architecture. And I learned some things, and then I got jobs as assistant stage managers, and I taught playwriting and taught acting and directed at college. I tried to learn what was special about playwriting, but it was very hard. Had I been associated with any theater in the world and just been allowed to hang around, I could have learned that. And I think that the problem with most playwrights is they really don't get a chance to learn that. They're writing in a room someplace.
Arnaud, do you have any tips to give these people? Either, you know, as I listen to you talk, I suddenly realize that I'm not talking to self-made millionaires or inherited millionaires. That every one of you has had the problem, certainly at the beginning of your career, of just making a living, at which time that you will accept a job that is not the ideal job. And perhaps you, in some of our discussion, we can get into that, because I'm sure that everybody else is here doing something until they become a great playwright. And
well, that's the problem.
Waiting for that.
You know, that was the problem with me. In order to make a living so that I could be a playwright, I got so mixed up in making a living that I never did any more playwriting.
I think that happens with all of us. I mean, you start out, I dressed sets, I was a book clerk, and I was a reader in the studios. You know, until you get started, you write at night, weekends, and finally, you know, you get there. I'd like to talk about some of the technical things, if we can get onto that. I agree with Bob that you've got to begin with a strong emotion, because what happens very often when you write a play, you get lost. You get lost many, many times, and you have to come back and say, well, why did this material interest me in the first place? And that's your anchor. If you don't have that strong emotion, you very rapidly get bored and you put the thing aside, or when you get all through with it, you realize that it's not right and you put it away. The other thing that I always try to do is to find a new character that has never been done. And maybe that's why the plays are few and far between. But I think that this is important. I remember when we did Deeper the Roots, there had never been a black man on the stage who had been an officer in the American Army and by definition was therefore a gentleman. That was a new character. That had never been on the stage. The same thing with Tomorrow the World. We wanted to put a little Nazi boy on the stage. The same thing in when I did the play with Mrs. Parker, that group of women I'd never seen done either in a novel or anywhere else. I think that writing plays has become more and more difficult for a very great many reasons. But if one can get this idea that you have something new that nobody has presented before out of timidity or lack of imagination, you've got to start for your material being considered as fresh. It makes you reject a lot of things because you say, well, that's a rubber stamp, I can't do that, or it's been done. And but as I say, looking for the new character seems to me the most interesting, because I think the most interesting thing about a play or about any work of art, whether it's a movie or a novel or anything, is character. Is character. I mean, we've got all the freedom now. We can use all the four-letter words, and it really doesn't matter. We seems to me have to come back to this thing of character. It's the hardest thing to write in terms of characters who has illusions, shares contradictions, all the rest. But it's still, I say, the most interesting.
When you say that you want to write about fresh characters, I can see that in your perhaps your one or two leading roles. But do you mean all the way through? Or you mean when an office boy comes in that he should not be a typical office boy? He should be an unusual office boy?
Well, you try, of course, to give him character. No, it's usually the main characters I'm talking about. And also, you look for a fresh background too, a new background. For instance, this last play that I've had such difficulty with, it takes place in a hospital. Well, the first thing I was appalled with is that hospital rooms are white and dull, and to have an actor or an audience look for 3 hours or 2.5 hours at white walls is very boring. Fortunately, it's set in a hospital, but set in a hospital in Rome, and I put in a cardinal suite. So what they look at for 2.5 hours is something very elegant and very beautiful. There's none of the sterility and antiseptic quality while the action is going on. Well, I think that's part of, that's again what you look for. You look for something new and fresh way to present material. I also happen to believe that that what the audience sees is very, very important, and this is past completely in the American theater. You still find it in Europe. I saw a production of Goldoni's of George Strehler, Christmas in Paris. And what was beautiful was the stage pictures that he was constantly creating. Now, McClintock used to do this in the old days, but for some reason, it seems to have gone out of the American theater, which is too bad. You get it in London very often.
You get it in Hal Prince.
Hal Prince. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I haven't seen his last 2 or 3 things. But it's important. It's important. But you're talking about musicals.
But I'm going in the reverse way.
Yeah?
I am going against that, because just all the things I said earlier,
Yeah.
the trouble with the theater is the manner is the matter. I really want to reduce the theater back to the words, back to the people, back to the characters, of course. I think as you get older, you simplify. And I also find myself really very much out of patience with as you get older, you also don't find as much fresh, which is interesting. I remember going to see 7-Year Itch by George Axelrod, his first play. And I was sitting next to Moss Hart, whom I knew vaguely. We were both alone, and we chatted during the first act intermission, and he said, I knew too much to have written this play. It's a wonderful, wonderful phrase. I mean, a man, summer, bachelor. I mean, Moss would have said, oh my God, it's been done 10,000 times. Why should I do it again? And I think it gets harder and harder as you get older to say, oh, hey, that's interesting, that's fresh. I want to write that, I want to tell that story, because you say it's been done. It's been done.
You know, Leiman Engel, who is a accomplished musical writer as well as but he makes his living being a conductor of Broadway musicals. And I think it was Take Me Along. He was the conductor in the pit, and I was asking him about the music, and he said, well, the composer just brought it in the lead sheet, which is just A, B flat, C, in other words, and then everything else had to be constructed so that the author just really was giving the tune, you see. And I said, well, Leiman, I said, you should, with all your background, why don't you write a musical? You could write a better musical than this. And he said, oh no, he said, I lack that kind of innocence.
What Bob says about words, too, again, when trying to cast this last play, had a meeting with Tony Quinn, he got very angry. He said, why did you write this play? Why does anybody write a play? He had just closed in Tennessee Williams' play in Boston, and he was furious. He says, I've brought my family here, I've taken an apartment for 6 months, and, it's closed. Why did you bother? And, I thought he was going to hit me. And I couldn't think of anything. So what came out was, well, I'm in love with words. And I realized that with my back to the wall, I really was in love with words, and that's why you really write a play. Language has become more and more important. I mean, movies and television, the image is the important thing. One of the last resources that the theater has is language. And of course, it's very, very difficult because our language is diminishing. It's becoming more and more homogenized. We don't have that richness. And when I get very, very depressed, which is quite often, I go back and I read Shakespeare and I read Chaucer, and it's marvelous. The language comes back, and you begin to feel good again. And then but then that's another search you make, along with new characters, to find language that will express what you want to say. And I'm not just talking about jokes. Jokes are not hard to write. I'm talking about an interesting way, a colorful way, the images, making them vivid, not phony baloney poetic, but the way people speak.
Do you think that our audiences today perhaps are conditioned not to like to listen to long speeches and use of verbal phrases that are elegant?
Well, I think they have a hunger for them, and they're finding it.
With that.
I think they have a hunger, and they're finding that they're tired of television. It's white bread, and they want to hear the language. Unfortunately, they're not being given it. I mean, when I go to the theater now, I'm distressed at the fact that, well, I read somewhere that the average vocabulary of most people is 600 words. Well, it seems to me there's no reason why a playwright has to begin with that assumption. Shakespeare had 10,000 words in his vocabulary. Milton had 11,000 words. But you go to the theater now, and it's the four-letter words over and over and over again, and I get so bored, as I was bored with them in the Army. I remember being in a barracks and the four-letter words, and I finally said to the guy next to me, will you please say fish cakes just once? And it's the same thing in the theater. I want to hear language. And we're not hearing it,
But I find that the younger generation tends to like to use an adjective and say something stinks rather than saying something more interesting, which is why a play is bad and...
Yes.
Rose? Yes.
Yeah, I would just say, vis-a-vis television again, that's one of the things that really does worry me about television. It has this huge audience, and it's conditioning them to know that in an hour you can solve everything, and it all comes out good, and that there are certain ways of solving things. I mean, we do that in theater, too. We have a kind of shorthand with the audience. They know certain things by the way we present them, but it's more complex. And television, the language, not only the word language, but even the imagery language is very simple. I worry about that. And I worry also about the acting, because they, in the same way, actors learn. I mean, they have I have a 2-hour special coming up. They had 2 hours of rehearsal. And then they went off on location, which was much more interesting than working with the actors. I worry about that kind of shorthand. And as a writer, I must say I worry about my own work and say, will this teach me things? Because we all want to be liked, and we want our work to be good, and we want people to say it's wonderful. Will this teach me to do things in ways which are not as good as I could have thought of had I tried harder? I worry about that, and I do know writers where you can actually see the difference in their work after they've worked in television. So it isn't an unmitigated good. I think it is a problem for us. But it is also a way to work and a way to see your work done.
For whatever the reason, it seems to me that our theater, the last couple of seasons, has been drifting into a style of challenging the audiences much less than the Playwrights did a few years back. And I think
a good idea.
And it may have something to do with the conditioning.
Yeah,
I mean, we never have had such prosperity, but never has the work been so bland.
Yeah, in television, a good idea goes a long way. You have a feeling that people sit around and say, wouldn't it be a terrific idea if a woman fell in love with a horse? I mean, real love. Oh, what a great idea. And they'll go ahead on it.
That's terrifying, though. Motion
Yes.
pictures. Yes. They did that in Hollywood 30 years ago.
But it's scary, isn't it?
It's what I call the what would happen if situation, where somebody dreams up an impossible situation, and then they say to the writer, now take it from there.
I don't want to watch television anymore unless I know it's a very special show, because I'll tell you why. They skim off everything that's current and important.
That's the
And they
big
treat
thing.
it with such superficiality that then you sort of say to yourself, well, that's been done, so I won't do it in a serious way. I remember I was once called, and Henry's just really told this story in a way. I was called by head of one of the studios, and he said, we'd like you to do a rewrite on such and such a movie. Did you ever see it? And I said, no, I never saw it. And he said, well, I'll tell you the story. And he got halfway through, and he said, well, I don't need to tell you the story. I'll just tell you who we've got as a cast. And I said, oh, fine, who? He said, Sidney Poitier and Vanessa Redgrave. And I said, oh, I see, I get the point. And about a month later, I was called by another studio saying that they wanted me to write a love story and blah, blah, blah. And do you have something in the trunk? And I said, no. And he said, well, I'll tell you the cast, Sidney Poitier and Audrey Hepburn. Well, no, they were just, I just revolt against this being, because I know nothing about that kind of a marriage. I suppose I could do research, but I'm not very good at that. But they skim everything that's current and everything that we should be talking about in some depth. And with some, Rose has just said, some, not just the language complexity, but the emotional complexity. And then what it does to most of us playwrights, at least it does it to me, maybe Jack, it doesn't do it to you, but I said, I can't handle it, it's been done.
Yeah.
And that's why I just hate to watch it.
Isn't there a challenge of using your words and your skill to take something that has been done?
No, I have a terrible feeling. When I'm writing, for example, I don't read the newspapers, I don't want to read anybody else's plays, anybody else's books, because if I get the slightest indication that they're dealing in the same area I am, I stop.
We have to open this to questions now, or we want to open this to questions. And if you'll all come up to the two microphones, I'll take you in alternate order. You're first.
Hello, I'm Spencer Boyd, and I'd like to direct this to Robert Anderson and Jack Heifner. First of all, to Mr. Anderson, nowadays there is off Broadway where you can try out your play and see what kinks it has and watch where the hurdles are and rework it before it hits Broadway. And I wondered, when you were starting out, what could a playwright do? Or was there just...
Well, really it seems to be more addressed to me. We didn't have off-Broadway. We had
right, I realized that. I wondered...
It was just starting. Well, I am not... I said to some people in the intermission here, I don't really like to see my plays tried out. I don't like to work... I was part of a group called the New Dramatists and Actors Studio and all those people, but I really like to hear my plays read first by the people who are going to do them, because I have a very weak ego, and if I hear it badly read, I lose my confidence in the play. No, we just read them. We read them, and we did have a group. Theater Incorporated had a group, and we would read our own plays aloud to each other and comment on them.
So that would be your reworking process.
But you went up to Arena Stage with all summer long.
But that was after Tea and Sympathy.
Oh,
but we generally we had discussion groups, but we didn't act. We didn't have the chance to see them act.
So then it would be more appropriate for Mr. Heifner, because then you had your plays worked on off Broadway, and then they would evolve before they moved along.
Absolutely. I don't think the off Broadway scene that I was involved in 5 years ago allows as much anymore, because off Broadway now gets reviewed in the New York Times. It was a haven then, a place to go, but you didn't get reviewed unless you wanted to, or you begged reviewers to come. Now it's, because off Broadway really barely exists because of finances, off Broadway's replaced it, and I think we're going to have to find a new name and a new space.
Right.
But it's still where I go back to work, and with a certain, like, maybe 20 of my close friends or something, I like to hear my plays read. I like them on tape. I work from tapes of readings, just for language, just for rhythms.
Well, you can work at Playwrights Horizons without having an opening night, and
right.
And Joe Papp has many plays that open down at his place that are not reviewed, to which
the pressure is though on off Broadway, because of equity and a lot of other things now, is much different though than when I started there 10 years ago.
I must say that I directed a play off Broadway one time, and I felt I didn't want it reviewed, but I felt that the actors desperately wanted to have some record of the fact that they were giving these great performances, and so I let them. I said, okay, who am I to stand in the way of these actors who've contributed their time getting some attention? And so I do think you're right. There is a pressure to get it reviewed that has nothing to do with your own personal desire.
Thank you.
Yeah. Over here.
Yes.
Jay Barney.
Jay Barney. How do you handle the problem of producers, actors, directors who believe they can rewrite what you have written and insist upon it, and sometimes have the clout to be very insistent.
They're not allowed to do it. I mean, a Dramatists Guild contract says that they can't change a word without your permission. And you can close the show if they do, Jay. I mean, you've been around long enough to know that just say, no, that's it. Now, some playwrights allow it to be done. Now, I shouldn't be saying all this in public, but you know, Bill Inge allowed Josh Logan to do a great deal on Picnic. And then won the Pulitzer Prize and $1 million, and then got mad about it and wrote all sorts of articles about his play being ruined. And I said, the Dramatists Guild gave you authority not to have a single word changed, and yet you let it, you either have it or shut up, you know. But, well, that's the rule. The law is that you can't change a word.
As a postscript to that, I once asked Elia Kazan about interfering with Tennessee Williams and with you. And I said, and he said, well, he said, I think that it's my function as a director to get Robert Anderson to write more of a better Robert Anderson play than he would have written if I hadn't given him my comments and persuading arguments.
Kazan is presumably so famous for this, and it's not true at all. You know, I don't have to tell you he didn't write a word of Tea and Sympathy, but he asks the right questions. I mean, he says, why did he marry her? Why did she do this? Why that? That's what, like a good editor will do in a book.
Exactly.
Why? But he never once suggested, I think that it would be great if she came in and found him doing so-and-so and so-and-so. And I've worked with some marvelous directors, Peter Glenville, Arvin Brown, Alan Schneider. Nobody's ever suggested writing a word or writing a line. But I think that if you bring in a script that isn't finished or has no last act or whatever, and you're in rehearsal, somebody's got to do something. And I remember Gadge once, Walter Kerr raised this point, and Gadge sent Walter a series of addressed envelopes, addressed postcards. He said, send this to every playwright I've ever worked with, and here are the list. And he says, if any of them writes back that I wrote a single line of that play, I'll buy you a dinner or something. And he never got any postcards back. It's true. I mean, it's a big legend.
What happens when you're in rehearsal, or before you begin rehearsal, you work with the director, and you go over the play, scene by scene. Sometimes he makes suggestions. You can either take them or not. Then, of course, what happens when you have that first reading, you think you've got the play down to the bone. You can see where you didn't need this line, you didn't need that line. And you go over the script again, and he makes suggestions about a cut. This happens. I don't regard this as a director interfering, because you see it in yourself very often. And the whole value when you get out of town is to know whether the material is holding. And you know that as well as the director, and then you sometimes get together and repair it together. I remember once with Elliot Nugent in the second act, he said, boys, we need a scene between the two adults. We just heard children's voices for too long. Now, there was no reason, technically, to have the scene, but Elliot was right, and he made us write a one-page scene just to break up what the audience was hearing. Well, it was extremely constructive, and he was absolutely right. So you do listen. There are contributions. The test, of course, of a play is what happens when you get it up there on the stage. And the value of being out of town is you want to know, first of all, everything that you've planned, whether it's working or not. And if it doesn't work, then you've got to find a way to make it work. My own experience is that I've been out of town. I've done very, very little rewriting. What I've done mostly is cutting. And that's about all. I remember once asking Kazan a question. It was when we were doing Deeper the Roots, and Lillian Hellman came down, and she made a lot of suggestions, and it made my collaborator, Jimmy Gow, very angry, and it got kind of wild at 3 o'clock in the morning, as it does, especially if you've had a show that looks like it's going to be a hit, and everybody can relax and, you know, afford to get angry. And I said to Kazan, I said, why is it when anybody who writes a serious play, such as Lillian Hellman or Arthur Miller or Ditz, others come around, try and help, all you get is antagonisms. I said, on the other hand, when Lindsay and Krauss have a play out of town, or Moss Hart and Kaufman, they all go up to Boston and they help. I said, why is this dichotomy? And he said, well, you know, those plays you can fix out of town. The other plays, the more serious plays, you can't fix out of town. And this happens over and over again. The reason you can't fix it is that a serious playwright usually has really done an awful lot of thinking, has really tried to probe into character. He isn't only interested in fresh and new jokes, he's really interested in trying to convey what he feels about life. This was illustrated, for instance, in a play of Lillian Hellman's called Another Part of the Forest, and they had third act trouble. There was just no third act there. And all they did, finally was to cut out 20 minutes to get the curtain down as fast as possible. Well, the reason and they couldn't fix it. The only fixing that could have been done might have taken her 6 or 8 months to take the play off completely and to rewrite it, and she, of course, wasn't prepared to do that. But coming back to my point, if you get a good director, and I've been lucky and had always good directors, they do help you, because first question they always ask, what is the theme of this play? So then you throw back to them, what do you think the theme of the play is? And time after time they've got it, exactly. And then does each scene illustrate the theme? Well, yes, it does, and then you point it out. And to that extent, there is that collaboration, but I don't feel there's any interference of the director writing or the producer writing, because they know the rule that Bob talks about in the drama skill. It's your play, and they respect that. That is one of the great dividends about writing for the theater, and that's why you do write for the theater. I mean, there's no point in writing for movies or television, except, it seems to me, for money, because you don't have any control. But in the theater, you have control.
I would have a footnote here, and that is that any of you who are playwrights, just make sure that the director does understand the play as you understand it. Because I think there have been troubles that you don't get together. I know Peter Glenville, on a play of mine called Silent Night, Lonely Night, he never wanted to talk about the play with me. And he kept saying, you know, you sound as though you feel I don't understand the play. This is before we went to rehearsal. And I said, no, Peter, but my custom is to talk over the play so that there are no surprises. But this, I think, has led to a great many problems when there's been a divergence of what the play is about and what's happening to the play before it goes into rehearsal.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to ask the panel if perhaps we can fathom what critics are about again. I want to know if you think there is a certain regional mentality in the United States that appraises a play differently from the New York critics. I am from Colorado. I'm a Westerner, and I choose to live here because this is an exciting place and the theater is my life. Certain plays have come out of the West that have been praised to the sky, and then when they arrive here, it's as though the New York critics are gunning for them, and the guns from the West are waiting here in the East. I speak specifically of Luis Valdez's Zoot Suit and Preston Jones's Texas Trilogy. I only saw one of the latter plays here because they got such such bad reviews. I thought they were awful, and I only went to see Diane Ladd in the Luann play because she's such a marvelous actress, and the whole thing was wonderful. I saw Zoot Suit in Los Angeles and was overwhelmed by it, maybe because the Chicano troubles also were evident in Denver when I was a boy. And then when it opened here, I couldn't understand. Had they changed it? I mean, I knew the stage was much larger and everything, but it's as though if something is good from the West, unless it reopens a la the Shadow Box at Long Wharf or something, everything is just knocked right down here. And I want to know if that has been evident to you.
I don't think it has anything to do with the West. I think that I think we pan plays from the North and the South and the East and so on. I do think that critics go to the theater much too often, and I think that we do get conditioned to expecting a certain kind of a play when we go into the theater. We already know what kind of a play that we expect to see, and the people better deliver it. I think that this poses a problem for a place like Zoot Suit and Texas Trilogy, although there is the thought that Texas Trilogy might have succeeded if they just brought one of those plays in and let it stand on its own. And the fact that it was called a trilogy made it seem as if it was trying to be a masterpiece of some kind, in which after seeing all three plays that you understood the history of America. And actually, Preston Jones was a very modest playwright who wrote good characters and good dialogue. And on that level, his plays were refreshing and could have succeeded. But as part of an imposing trilogy, everybody said, well, what is underneath all this?
Henry, he was also being compared to Eugene O'Neill.
Yes.
Wow.
He had a lot to live up to.
I don't think there's a conspiracy. I've had a play come in from Long Wharf which got totally different reviews from what I got up there with the same cast, same set, same play. This is the mystery of the theater. You haven't the vaguest idea what's going to happen that night. If you've been involved in the theater and seen a play night after night after night, you realize it's a different performance almost every single night. My Teresa Wright was on Never Sang My Father, and I'm not sure I was very happy about this because she came home every night and told me how it went. And she'd say, "Oh God, we had a standing ovation tonight," or somebody, you know. I don't want to know that. It's too nerve-wracking.
You want to know that, but you don't want to know the night.
There was not a standing ovation.
Henry?
Yeah.
Also, I mean, that works in reverse, I know, because when we opened Vanities in certain cities, like in San Francisco, I thought it was a perfect city for it. And you get the same thing as plays coming from out of town into New York, much praise, and we say, "Oh, so what? Show me." You get the same thing there. It came in there with too much publicity. It was a letdown. I mean, it was a simple little play that had been built up to
Be a blockbuster.
to be a blockbuster, and it couldn't live up to its pre-press. It just really couldn't. I mean, it works the other way too, from a New York show.
Tough all over.
What we need is Gene is a press agent too, and what we need is press agents who will say that this is a modest little play, and
No, I don't think so.
do any of you else want to comment on that? All right, this question here.
I'm Kathy Colton. I'm an acting student at Delphi University. And I was wondering, do you feel just as much success can be accomplished by pushing your own script as by putting it through a literary agent?
You can't function without an agent. Playwrights cannot work without an agent. Producers, isn't that true? Producers will by and large not read play that hasn't come from an agent. There are 10,000 plays copyrighted every year, which means there must be about 25,000 written or more. And the rule is, as far as I know, 35 years I've been around, that they won't read a play that doesn't come through an agent.
Is that for legal protection or what?
It's past the first line of defense. It
There's
must
been
have
one opinion expressed on it,
Right.
which gives them some assurance. You know.
Yeah, I think, though, that for a very beginning playwright to send a play to the O'Neill or perhaps to Playwrights Horizons or so, I don't imagine that you would need an agent to do that. I think they probably read it.
Did you have an agent, Jack, when you started?
No.
I've heard of people, though, sending plays to literary agents. One example in particular, to Bertolt Brecht's agent. And they never heard anything else from the agent. And the play turned up a couple of years later with a different title and a copyright, and it had been changed just enough to acquire that different copyright.
It's very rare.
That's unethical.
It's very rare, very
No, I
rare.
never heard of that.
I've never heard.
May I just ask a question? Bob talked about his relationship with Audrey Wood over the years as an agent. This is the first time we've touched on agents again. I think, could we do a quick roundup on each one's background? Do you have an agent or don't do it? How do they work for you? Because I think that's a great...
How do you, I think perhaps a better question to ask is, how do you decide who is a good agent for you, or do you have any option on that when you go looking for an agent? I mean, how should a young writer go about finding the agent that's good for him, or if he finds a bad one, he can change it to a better one, can't he?
Well, yeah, I think from my point of view, Chris, they do all the legwork and all the phone work, and I want someone just to take care of the business and leave me alone and just call me when it's important, and that's what's important to me, and can do good contracts. But I feel like the same as with a director, I have to sit down with my agent and find out if he understands the play before he sends it out, that we're talking about the same career goals, that if I say I don't want to do this, I think it has to be a good friendship, a really good friendship, and they have to believe in you an awful lot to allow you to say, I don't want to work, I don't want to do that, and to turn down things and I don't want to be pressured to do things I don't want to do particularly.
But when you first send your play to an agent you hope will handle you, you're not really in that strong a position as to...
No, I didn't have an agent until Vanities opened, and then agents approached me. So I couldn't get one until it opened.
I was just starting. I was away at war, and I'd written a play that won a prize as the best play written by a serviceman overseas, and I wasn't here. And my first wife found me my agent, Audrey Wood, who she was working with the Theatre Guild at that time, and she knew agents. And Audrey Wood was considered, I think at that time, probably the best, if not one of the best. And so that was it. My first wife then, after working with a theater girl, became an agent. She became a very different kind of an agent, though. Audrey is an agent who reads a script and says whether she likes it or not, doesn't make much comment on the text of the script, or good, bad, or indifferent. She sort of says, well, what should we do with it? And moves on from there very effectively. My first wife, on the other hand, was a very creative agent. She was a motherer. She was a wonderful nurturer. And when she died, there were 8 plays dedicated to her because of this value that she had. She's the only agent that I've ever known, really, who did do this. She was very skilled in the theater, very knowledgeable about the theater. She'd been a director, a producer, and many other things in the theater, so she knew what she was talking about when she talked about a play. But I think a young playwright needs that. You've got a great scene here, or you've got a great, wonderful thing here, but you're lacking in your third act, and sort of. But most agents don't do that.
Jane?
Well, I have been an agent, so I don't think I'll talk about it.
Now, my agent is also Audrey Wood, and at one time Phyllis was my agent, matter of fact. I think Bob is right that young playwrights need an agent who is an editor more than almost anything else. And I don't know how you go about finding that, because I haven't been young in a long time. I just wouldn't know. But then as you get along, then you need somebody who is shrewder and sharper and takes it for granted that you can write a play and reads it and says, I think this will go, or I don't think this will go, and is very honest with you, and that's what Audrey does. She's an extremely honest lady. If she doesn't like it, she'll tell you that in so many words, which is very helpful.
What happens if you happen to write a play that she doesn't like? Does she remain your agent on that play, or do you find, or?
Well, she's never said to me, this is a play I wouldn't handle, so evidently she hasn't hated it that much.
So that she will...
But I think if she did find
she'll work on your behalf even when she's not terribly enthusiastic.
I think if she had a play of mine that she really didn't like, she would probably say, Henry, you better take this to somebody else, because I just couldn't honestly represent it, that's all. She's just that straightforward.
But that's unlikely, because an agent, Henry, don't you think, invests in the playwright, not in the play? And she wants to represent you, and so she's not too keen about this one, but she likes you.
Yeah, but the question of turning down a play has never happened, so I can't tell. You know, I imagine it would happen sometime.
I don't think so.
No?
No, not if the agent has been handling you for a long time. They would try to do the best that he or she could.
I mean, I've had all these terrible plays and she hasn't told me? Is that what you mean?
As a matter of fact, this reminds me of something I'd forgotten. At the period when my first wife was an agent, and I maybe would read a couple of her plays, and I said, my God, are you trying to get this play produced? And she said, that's the most arrogant statement I've ever heard in my life. She said, I like this playwright. And she said, this isn't a particularly good play, but I said, oh, I was very pure. Talk about innocence. Good Lord. Purity. I said, you should never try to sell a play that you wouldn't produce yourself. Can you imagine? And she told me how arrogant I was and proceeded to sell the play.
Is that before she married you or afterwards? Do you make any comments on that?
Well, I just think an agent is indispensable. I had Leah Salisbury for 30 years, and not only in the contracts, but there's the whole thing of secondary rights. And when you write a play and it goes, you have an income for about 30 years. Suddenly she says, I've sold it to Bolivia for $500, or Israeli has renewed their interest and is going to do it, or I've gotten a translation from Stockholm. Leah was very, very good at that, and so there was always money coming in. She never stopped, and of course there was as I say, the stock company rights and all the rest. And unless one has somebody to do that, or one is ready to do it himself, it's, as I say, indispensable. And then when she died, I went with Audrey, and I call Audrey the sworn encourager, because that's exactly what she is. What you look for in an agent is support and understanding, and I agree with Bob. They really invest in the playwright. I know Leah sent around plays that she didn't have, of mine, which she didn't have any particular competence in, and after a while I didn't either, and so we agreed to withdraw them. But she never hesitated about sending them around. I think what you have to find, of course, is an agent who believes in you and you believe in her or him, and take it from there.
Well, I have a feeling that my experience is going to be closer to your experience as a young writer. Not that I'm a baby writer, but it's very difficult, I think, to find an agent. Many agents won't even read your work. They charge you a fee for reading it, which I think is very horrendous, but they do. Many of them don't really know anything, and they're very free with advice. And yet, when you come back, I had a friend tell me the other day, she was writing a novel, not a play, but she had gotten advice from her agent, and she came back and looked at it and said, she doesn't want me to write this novel. She wants me to write another novel with another character. I mean, you have to be very careful about accepting that kind of motherly advice because sometimes it's the wrong advice for you. I think finding an agent is very, very difficult. And I've had agents who wouldn't return my phone calls and made me feel worse than any producer, and any rejection ever made me feel. Rejection by your agent is like rejection by your mother. I just think it's awfully difficult. If you go around and happen to meet somebody like an analyst or something whom you say, gee, there's a resonance here. They know what I'm talking about. I know what they're talking about. Stick with that person. If they seem worthy of your trust, give it to them. But I think it's a very hard thing. I think it's also true that on the top level, to come in without an agent is like coming in with a handwritten manuscript. I mean, nobody will read it. But it is very hard on the bottom level to find somebody else who will give you the time. And if they do, very often they are convinced. The starting out agent, who probably has more energy to give to the starting out writer, is also secretly convinced that when you make it, you'll leave them. And that often happens. So there's a kind of personal, human thing that has to sort of go on. There has to be an establishment of trust. And it is not easy, and I don't know the answer to it except, I guess, to meet as many as you can. And then the one that seems to say to you what you think you're trying to say to them, stick with them a while, and if it works, consider yourself lucky if you can create a trust relationship. But I think it's very, very hard. When I went to the O'Neill, it was my first experience with being with a lot of playwrights. And as long as I've said that, let me say also the hardest thing about being with a playwright is you're not with a lot of playwrights a lot. In any production, there are a lot of actors, and they talk to each other, sometimes about you. And there's a director who probably has been an actor at some time in his life, and he's with the actors. And then there's usually one playwright, and it's a very lonely situation. In going around and talking at the O'Neill, I was so excited to be with playwrights, and I said, what do playwrights talk about? And it turned out for me that what they were talking about was what kind of paper they typed on. Whether erasable bond paper was better than some other kind of paper, and about their agents and their problems with their agents. Those apparently are the two most upsetting problems that playwrights have to deal with. I think it's a real problem question, and do your best. If you find somebody good, you're lucky.
Over here. Yeah.
You just did.
Oh, I'm sorry, I got the order wrong. Your name.
Just time for these two questions, Henry.
Okay, I hope this will be very short. I'd like to address it to Henry Denker. I'd like to know who you consider in your lifetime, in this country or another country, who you consider to have been very great actors or very good actors. And I'd also like to know if you would describe for us the role that you've found uncastable in your as yet unproduced play.
Well, in terms of, great actors, the great actor of our time is Laurence Olivier. We don't have an American actor who comes within hundreds of miles of him. To mention the names of American actors who don't come within hundreds of miles of him is just going to be insulting to them and isn't going to help. But you can name them yourself. The role that I was talking about was the role itself was an actor. And he was the prime American actor of our time. In other words, if we had a Laurence Olivier in this country, he would be that character. And we were looking for somebody who could do that, and we don't have anybody who comes anywhere near doing that.
Is there an age?
Yes, he has to be a man about 50. Got to be just getting past his...
We have only time for one more question.
My name is Joyce Koplos, and I'll make the question short. What I want to know is how to move a scene. It's technical. How to move a conflict. What is a conflict between characters? I wrote a musical, like a children's teenage play, had no difficulty, but when I'm now trying to learn the craft of a scene, I don't know what in the world it means for one character to relate to another in conflict and move it through the scene. It somehow has gone when I go down to the scene itself.
A quick answer to that?
What's the basis of the play?
Every scene, every play has a who wants what. Somebody wants something. Somebody is always driving a scene. An actor will come and the actor will say, what's my action in this scene? And the director will try to help him. The action being in the scene, trying to drive something, trying to want something. Conflict is created, very obviously, by somebody who wants something that's difficult to achieve. and that somebody doesn't want them or circumstances don't want them to have it, as in the Glass Menagerie. You've got a crippled girl who wants a boyfriend and the circumstances are against her. Other times it's a one-to-one situation. Somebody wants to steal something, somebody doesn't want them to steal. I mean, these are very simple. That's conflict.
There never seems to be enough time, and so I'm going to have to conclude this session right now with thanking everybody here, both the audience and the panel. This concludes the American Theatre Wing series of seminars on working in the theatre. We continue our series on working in the theatre with the producing team tomorrow of The Elephant Man, which is on Broadway, and the producing team will come and discuss everything that goes into producing a play from option to opening. For those that are here and want to see it again, please sign up. And I have to make a plea that we need volunteers, and anyone that can come and work at the wing, please sign up at the door. We need actors and actresses to make telephone calls, to work on our hospital shows, to book theater into the Saturday theater for children's shows, and to do typing, nitty-gritty work. Okay, so please sign up if you can possibly spare us any time. Thank you very, very much for coming. Hope I'll see you tomorrow.
Come on along and listen to the lullaby of Broadway, the hipperay and ballyhoo, the lullaby of Broadway, the rumble of a subway train, the rattle of a taxi, the daffodils who entertain, at Angelo's and Maxie's where the Broadway baby says goodnight. It's early in the morning, and babies don't sleep tight.